While I was deployed in Okinawa, my father sold my house to bail out my useless brother. When I returned, they stood on the porch laughing. "You're homeless now." I just grinned. "What's so funny?" they demanded. I said, "The place you sold was actually." What if the people you trusted most looked you dead in the eye, told you were homeless, and then laughed? My own family did exactly that. But what they thought was the end of my story, a shocking betrayal that left me shattered, was actually just the beginning of their reckoning. I had barely stepped out of that taxi, my sea bag still heavy on my shoulder, boots still dusty from Okinawa, when I saw them. My father, my older brother, Chad, standing on my porch, smirking like they'd been waiting all day just to drop a bomb I'd never see coming. And before I'd even taken 3 steps toward the house, my father said it. "You're homeless now." Just like that. No hello. No welcome home. Just a sentence that hit me harder than any blast wave I'd ever felt downrange. My blood ran cold. I froze. "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, but Chad just snorted into his beer. "We sold your house, sis." Try to keep up. They actually laughed. Laughed at me. At their daughter, their sister, coming home from an overseas rotation to find everything gone. My father pointed lazily at the front door, as if this were nothing more than a game. "Your brother needed help. Family sacrifices for family. You weren't here. You didn't need the place." And then he added the part that told me everything about how little they thought of me. "You Marines bounce around anyway. What difference does a house make?" I should have exploded. Should have cursed. Should have fallen apart right there on the driveway. But instead, a slow, steady smile stretched across my face, a smile that made both of them frown. My father snapped, "What's so funny?" And I said, "The house you sold was actually..." But before I finished that sentence, I need to take you back to how this whole thing began. Because the truth is, none of this was an accident. They didn't stumble into this betrayal. They planned it, just not as well as they thought. 3 months earlier, I was stationed in Okinawa, halfway through a 6-month rotation. Sure, duty isn't glamorous, but it's predictable, and predictable is something Marines don't get often. I used my off hours to call home, to check on the house. That place, I'd owned it for 8 years. Bought it myself after my second deployment. Renovated it room by room on my own dime. It was supposed to be my stability, my anchor, my future. But every time I call home, things fell off. My father would answer, sounding irritated, like I was interrupting something. My brother, Chad, the eternal finding himself project, had moved back in with Dad after losing yet another job. Whenever I asked what he was doing to get back on his feet, Dad would defend him. "He just needs a little time. He's working on it. Don't be so judgmental, Maria." I'd hear dishes clattering, voices I didn't recognize. Once, I heard someone yell, "Did she send the money yet?" The call disconnected 2 seconds later. I try not to overthink it. Try to give him grace. After all, I've been gone my entire adult life, training, deploying, bouncing from base to base. Maybe I didn't understand what was happening back home. Maybe I didn't want to. But 2 weeks before my homecoming, I got a message that should have been my final warning. A short text from my father. "Call us before you come home." No punctuation. No explanation. I stared at it for a long time, feeling that cold twist in my gut that every Marine knows. Asterisk, something's wrong. Something's coming. Asterisk, but duty hours were crazy that week. By the time I got a chance to call, it rang to voicemail twice. I told myself it wasn't important. My flight was booked. My leave approved. I'd be home soon enough. And then I was standing in my driveway, staring at the people who were supposed to be my family, realizing they'd sold the roof over my head to pay off my brother's gambling debt. I didn't know that part yet. Not then. But I could already see the guilt in their eyes, the shamelessness in their posture. You can always tell when someone's done something terrible and convinced themselves it was justified. Chad lifted his beer again, like he was celebrating. "Don't look so shocked, sis. You were gone. Dad had power of attorney. Easy process. You'll get over it." I felt my jaw tighten, but the smile didn't leave my face. If anything, it grew. "Is that what he told you?" I asked softly. My father's eyebrows knitted together. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because what they didn't know, what would hit them like a truck in about 90 seconds, was that the house they sold wasn't what they thought it was. Legally, financially, structurally, they had no idea what they'd actually put on the market. But I wasn't ready to drop that on them. Not immediately. Sometimes, revenge needs time to simmer just a little longer. I set my sea bag down, brushed dust off my sleeve, and walked toward the porch like nothing could touch me. My father stepped aside, annoyed but confused. Chad scoffed. Look at her acting all calm. They thought I was calm because I was weak, because I was stunned. They had no idea I was calm because I was already 10 steps ahead. Marines don't come home hoping for the best. We come home prepared for the worst. And this was nothing compared to what I'd survived before. I didn't go inside right away. I just stood there on the porch with both of them staring at me, waiting for me to cry or break or crumble the way they'd probably rehearsed in their heads. But nothing came. No tears, no begging, no collapsing. Just a long, heavy silence that made my father shift uncomfortably and made Chad tap his beer against the railing like he couldn't stand his own nerves. That silence was the only power I needed at that moment. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Well, aren't you going to say something? I tilted my head, studying him. The man who used to wake up at 5 every morning to make me breakfast before school. The man who stood in the front row at my boot camp graduation with tears in his eyes. The man who hugged me so tight before my first deployment that I almost couldn't breathe. I wondered when exactly he'd stopped being that man. I wondered when I stopped being his daughter and became his backup bank account instead. When did you sell it? I asked, my voice steady. 3 weeks ago, he said. It was the right thing to do. Your brother needed help. There was again. Always needs. Always about Chad. Always about his next fix, his next crisis, his next temporary setback. And you didn't think to call me? I asked. He scoffed. You were overseas, busy. You Marines have your heads in the clouds. Always too busy to pick up a phone. That's interesting, I said, because I called every week. Chad rolled his eyes. Oh, here we go. I turned to him. Did you know? Did you actually sit there and watch him sign away my home? He shrugged, lazy, unbothered. Dad said it was fine. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He's Dad. I almost laughed at that, at how unself-aware a grown man could be. But instead of arguing, I walked down the steps and took a slow lap across the yard, letting the cold Washington air clear my head. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, trimmed hedges, the flagpole I'd installed after re-enlisting. But it didn't feel the same. Something important had been broken. Something deeper than a deed or a signature. Behind me, my father called out, "We put the money to good use. Your brother's debt is handled. He's safe now." Debt. That word sat in my stomach like a stone. Chad wasn't the type who paid off debt. Chad was the type who created debt like it was a hobby. And Dad, he enabled him every step of the way. I walked back toward them, step by step, until I was standing at the bottom of the porch stairs. You two want to tell me the whole truth, I said, or do you want me to find it myself? My father's jaw tightened. Chad drank the last of his beer and crushed the can in his hand. What truth? He said. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Really? I asked. Because when I left, the house was paid off. I had no debt, no liens, nothing pending. For you to sell it fast, you'd have needed cash buyers. That means desperation. Whose desperation? Chad's eyes flickered just for a second, but I caught it. My brother's, I said softly. So let's hear it. Gambling? Drugs? Loan shark? Which was at this time? My father exploded. Stop interrogating your brother like he's some criminal. I'm interrogating, I said calmly, because my house is gone. You were gone, he shot back. Always gone. Always Marine Corps. This Marine Corps that you think you're better than everyone. You think you don't need this family. I've been serving this country for 13 years, I said, and every single assignment, I came home to this house. My house. The one thing I worked for. The one thing that was mine. He waved a hand dismissively. You'll buy another one. You make good money, better than him. He pointed at Chad, like Chad was a helpless child, not a 39-year-old man who'd been bailed out by the family more times than I could count. I felt something inside me crack. Not break, but shift. I saw them both clearly in that moment, like a lens had finally come into focus. Dad wasn't helping Chad because he was kind. He was helping him because he needed someone to need him. And Chad wasn't apologizing because he never had to. Dad always took the fall for him. And now they'd taken something from me because they assumed I was strong enough to lose it. Strong enough to bounce back. Strong enough to survive betrayal. That's the thing about being the strong one. People assume you don't feel the knife when they twist it. And then the front door opened. A woman stepped out. Blonde hair, sweatpants, holding a mug that said, "Mama needs coffee." Not my father's girlfriend. Not a neighbor. Someone else entirely. "Who are you?" I asked. She smiled lightly. "I'm Emily, the new owner." My father winced. Chad shifted, and my world tilted because that meant the house wasn't just sold. It was closed. Final. And yet, I still smiled. "Congratulations," I said to the woman. "Did they tell you everything?" She blinked. "Everything." I looked back at my father and brother. Their faces pale, just a shade, just enough for me to know I was not the only one standing in dangerous territory. I turned to Emily. "Did they tell you that the house you bought?" I paused, letting the tension grow, letting my father fidget, and Chad grip the railing like it could save him. "Isn't actually in their name." Emily looked confused. My father's voice cracked. "Maria, don't." But I wasn't done. Not even close. Emily blinked at me, as if she wasn't sure whether to smile or step back into the house she thought she owned. She looked like the kind of woman who tried to avoid conflict her whole life. Gentle, polite, the sort who apologized when other people bumped into her. And here she was, caught in the middle of a mess she didn't even know existed. She held her coffee mug a little tighter. "What do you mean it's not in their name?" "The paperwork." "I'm sure the paperwork looked official," I said, keeping my voice even and calm. "But paperwork only tells one side of the story." I looked at my father, then let the silence drag, letting him feel the weight of what he'd done. His face flushed red, the kind of red that comes from shame mixed with anger. Chad quietly muttered something under his breath, but even he had stopped smirking. They both knew I wasn't bluffing. They knew I had something they didn't understand, something they hadn't accounted for when they decided to. "Use my power of attorney like a golden ticket." "I don't understand," Emily whispered. "Your father said." "My father says a lot of things," I replied. "Let me ask you something. When you bought this house, who handled the sale?" She glanced at my father, then back at me. "A man named Adam. He said he was helping your family with the transfer." I closed my eyes just for a second. Adam? Of course it was Adam, an old acquaintance of my father's. Someone who always had a connection or a deal. A man who operated in the gray areas of anything involving money or property. The kind of man who showed up at barbecues when my father remarried, always bragging about flipping houses without ever lifting a hammer. The kind who knew how to turn desperation into profit. "Did you sign anything with an attorney present?" I asked. She shook her head. "He said it wasn't necessary. He said the family wanted it quick." The last word cracked a little. Quick. That's how these things happened. Quick sales. Quick transfers. Quick lies. Quick destruction. Behind me, my father stepped forward. "Maria, enough. You're upsetting her." I turned around slowly. "Upsetting her? You sold her a house you had no right to sell. You stole from me, and you put her in the middle of it." My voice stayed calm, but something sharp moved underneath it. Years in the Marine Corps had taught me that raising your voice was the quickest way to lose power. Silence, restraint, precision. Those were far more effective weapons. My father rubbed his forehead. "You weren't here. You didn't need the house. We handled things the best we could." "The best you could?" I echoed. "Or the fastest way to clean up another one of Chad's disasters." Chad stiffened. "It wasn't a disaster. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that cost thousands." I asked. "Or tens of thousands? Let me guess. Sports betting? Poker? Or did you finally graduate to loan sharks?" He looked away, jaw tight. That was enough of an answer. I turned back to Emily. "How long have you been here?" "A week," she said softly. "We just moved in." "And did you wonder why the sale went so fast?" She hesitated. "A little, but your father said you were living overseas and wanted the money for something else. He said you'd agreed." I let out a breath that felt like it had been locked inside me for months. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a scam. A full-blown, orchestrated, deliberate scam. carried out while I was halfway across the world, wearing the uniform of the country that trusted me to serve with integrity. Emily, I said gently, I'm sorry you were dragged into this. But the truth is, they didn't have the legal right to sell this house. Not fully. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document, a copy of something I'd carried with me since deployment ended. Her eyes traced the page as I held it out. This house was purchased using a VA home loan. That means certain protections apply and certain rules. And selling it without me present, without my consent, without proper legal procedure. I glanced at my father. That's a federal issue, not a family issue. Emily's eyes widened. My father's face went pale. Chad's bravado evaporated completely. He looked like a kid caught stealing candy from a store shelf. I continued. Power of attorney gives temporary rights to handle bills, repairs, emergencies. It does not give the right to sell federally backed property without filing a series of authorizations, none of which were done. Emily pressed a hand against her chest. Are you saying the sale is invalid? I'm saying, I replied slowly, that this isn't what you think it is, and unfortunately, you'll need legal help to sort it out. My father stepped closer, voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. Maria, don't do this. We're family. That didn't stop you, I said. Family didn't matter when you needed quick cash. It was for your brother, he shouted. And what about me? I asked quietly. When did I stop being your child? When did I become expendable? For the first time since I'd stepped onto that porch, he had no answer. Emily finally spoke again. What do we do now? You, I said, get a lawyer. And you tell them everything. And you stop speaking to my father outside of official channels. Because the deeper you let yourself get involved with this situation, the worse it will be for you. She nodded slowly, clutching her mug like it was the only solid object left in her world. My father pointed a finger at me. You're ruining everything. I shook my head. No, you ruined everything the minute you treated my service as an opportunity instead of a sacrifice. Chad muttered something about Marine attitude, but I barely heard him. I was already stepping off the porch, lifting my sea bag again, my boots crunching against the gravel. The air felt sharp and cold, but in a way that cleared my mind rather than clouded it. I started walking toward the street. My father yelled behind me. Where are you going? Oh, I said. You don't have one. Chad shouted. I turned back toward them, letting the porch light cast a halo behind their silhouettes. That, I said, is what you think. And then, for the first time since landing, I actually felt calm. Because the truth was, they had no idea how much trouble they had created for themselves. No idea what the next days would bring. No idea how unprepared they were for the consequences. And I didn't need to frighten them with details. Fear grows best when it's left unexplained. I didn't sleep that night. I checked into a cheap roadside motel, the kind with the buzzing neon sign and the humming air conditioner that rattled louder than the traffic outside. I set my sea bag on the chair, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my phone. My father's number flashed across the screen 3 times before I finally put the phone face down and let it ring out. I wasn't ready to talk to him, not when my chest still felt tight and my pulse still jumped every time I replayed the moment on the porch. I thought about Emily's stunned face, about Chad's guilt dressed up as bravado, and about my father, his anger, his excuses, his insistence that what he'd done was for the family. People love to use the word family when they need something from you. It's amazing how rarely they use it when you need something from them. The motel smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaning spray. I took a shower just to wash off the day, but even after the hot water ran cold, the heaviness didn't lift. So, I sat back on the bed, turned on the little lamp, and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying since Okinawa. Paperwork, notes, screenshots, emails, everything I'd gathered in those final weeks overseas when the truth had started taking shape. It hadn't happened all at once. Betrayal rarely does. It starts with little cracks, uneasy silences, vague explanations, half-finished sentences. Then one day, the dam breaks, and you realize every red flag had been trying to warn you. I still remember the first moment it truly hit me. I was standing on a balcony outside the barracks in Okinawa, the air thick with humidity, my camis clinging to my skin even though the sun had already set. The cicadas were screaming in the trees like they were trying to drown out whatever thoughts I was having. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another notification. Another automated alert. I almost ignored it, but then I saw the words property ownership update, and every instinct I'd ever honed in the core told me to stop and read. The message wasn't long. It didn't explain anything, just a digital confirmation that an ownership change had been processed. Not completed, not verified, just processed. My name was still on the house, but there was another name added, a blurry one, an incomplete one like someone had started a transfer but hadn't finished it. I immediately called my father. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. Texted him. No reply. Then I tried Chad. Even though I knew he wouldn't pick up, he didn't. I tried again. Nothing. I stood there on that balcony, staring out at the Pacific. The night breeze felt warm against my face, but my stomach had gone cold. Not because I knew what was happening, but because I didn't. And that uncertainty was worse than any truth could have been. The next day, during my lunch break, I asked one of the JAG officers on base if he had 5 minutes. He gave me 10. I told him what I'd seen. He didn't panic. He just asked one question. Who has your power of attorney? When I said my father's name, something in his expression shifted. Not pity, not judgment, but recognition. He'd seen this before. Too many times. He told me stories, vague ones without names, about service members getting burned while deployed. Families selling cars, cashing out accounts, refinancing properties, emptying storage units, even signing divorce papers on behalf of someone halfway around the world. Trust is good, he said, but oversight is better. Those words stuck with me. Asterisk trust is good. Oversight is better. Asterisk, I asked what to do next. He told me to request full transaction logs from the county. He showed me which office to email, which forms to submit, how to phrase the request so it didn't get buried. I sent everything that same afternoon. A week later, the file came through. I opened it on my bunk, expecting confusion, a mistake, a clerical error. But the moment I saw the signatures, the dates, the notations, the buyer's name, Adam, I felt the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and doesn't thaw. My father had signed the first authorization 2 days after telling me he loved how peaceful the house felt lately. He'd signed the second after texting me a heart emoji. And the third, the one that allowed the property to move forward for sale on the same day, I'd called him from a field exercise and told him I missed home. He never told me. Not once. Not even a hint. And Chad? The log showed his bank account as one of the destinations for the wired money. I sat on my bunk for a long time, staring at the screen. I remember the dim light above my bed, flickering, the hum of the fan overhead, the muffled sounds of Marines laughing in the hallway after a long day. Life kept moving around me, but I felt frozen. Later that night, I called my father again. This time he answered, but only because he didn't recognize the number. I had used the office phone instead of my own. His voice was cheerful at first. Too cheerful. Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay over there? I swallowed hard. Did you sell my house? The pause that followed told me everything. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Long enough for a world to collapse. Then he said, before you get upset. I hung up. I didn't trust myself to speak. And over the next few days, whenever he called back, I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. I wasn't ready to listen to his reasoning or his guilt or his justification. I wasn't ready to listen to a man who hadn't respected me enough to tell me the truth. But what I was ready for, what slowly, steadily began building inside me, was a plan. People think revenge is loud, explosive, dramatic. But the truth is, good revenge is quiet. It breathes. It waits. It watches. It sharpens itself in the dark until the moment it's needed. When my deployment ended, I made no announcement. I booked the earliest flight home and landed at SeaTac before sunrise. I didn't tell Dad. Didn't tell Chad. Didn't tell anyone. I rented a car from the airport, stopped by the county recorder's office as soon as they opened, and requested every document in person. I spent 2 hours with a clerk who had seen enough messy family disputes to spot trouble from a mile away. She didn't say much, but the sympathy in her eyes told me I wasn't wrong. When I walked out with the full packet of documents, the truth hit me fully. For the first time, my father and brother had legally cornered themselves. They just didn't know it yet. That night, as I sat in that cheap motel with the buzz of a neon sign seeping through the window, I laid out every page, every signature, every timestamp. I highlighted lines, circled dates, cross-referenced entries. The betrayal still hurt. God, it hurt. But the clarity that came with understanding the scope of their mistakes felt like air filling my lungs again. They thought they'd beaten me. They thought I'd come home helpless. They thought a Marine would crumble because of a house. But they forgot something. They forgot who raised me. They forgot that Mom taught me how to fight quietly. They forgot that the Corps taught me how to fight smart. And worst of all for them, they forgot that consequences are patient. The next morning, I drove back to the neighborhood before the sun had fully risen. The houses were quiet, the lawns still covered in dew, and a soft gray fog hung low over the street, like the world hadn't quite woken up yet. I parked a few houses down from mine and sat there for a moment, letting the engine tick itself into silence. It felt strange, sitting that close to a place that had once been my sanctuary, now occupied by strangers because the people who should have protected me decided I was expendable. I watched the porch light flicker on. Emily stepped outside in a light jacket, looking like she hadn't slept much either. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the yard with a lost expression. I got out of the car and walked toward her slowly so I wouldn't startle her. When she looked up and saw me, I lifted a hand. "Morning. Morning," she said softly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I know," I said, "but we have a lot to sort out." I stepped onto the grass and stayed a few feet away, not wanting to invade the space that, for the moment, she believed was hers. "Did you talk to anyone last night?" She nodded. "My husband. He's flying back tonight. He said we'll get a lawyer first thing tomorrow." Then she hesitated and added, "I didn't tell your father." "Good," I said. "Don't." She exhaled shakily and sank onto the porch step, the mug in her hand trembling slightly. "I don't know how this happened. We've been saving for years. This was supposed to be our fresh start, our first real home." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. Not because I caused any of this, but because the damage done by my father had spilled onto someone who didn't deserve it. I sat down on the step beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong, Emily. You bought a house. You trusted the people selling it. That's what anyone would do." She nodded, but tears slipped down her cheek anyway. "When he told us he had authority, we believed him. He seemed so certain." "My father always sounds certain," I said, "even when he's dead wrong." She wiped her face quickly. "What do you think will happen now?" "That depends on how honest you want to be with your lawyer," I said, "and how honest they want to be with the court." I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 copies of the documents I'd assembled. "Here. These are for your attorney. They outline everything I told you yesterday." Emily took the papers, her fingers brushing mine briefly. "This is going to get messy, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, "but messy doesn't mean hopeless." Before she could respond, the front door swung open and my father stepped out. His expression was the same one he used to wear when he scolded me as a teenager. Tight, rigid, impatient. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "Talking," I said calmly. He pointed at me like I was a trespasser on my own lawn. "Not without my permission, you're not." I stared at him. "Your permission?" I repeated. "That's interesting, considering none of this belongs to you." "It doesn't belong to you either," he shouted, and Emily flinched beside me. I stood from a step and faced him fully. "It never belonged to you. You acted like you could make decisions about my life because you had a piece of paper and a signature. Power of attorney isn't ownership, Dad. It's responsibility, and you abused it." "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Your brother was in danger. He had people after him." "People are always after him," I replied. "That's not an excuse to steal from me." "It wasn't stealing," he barked. "You always judge him. You always think you're better than him because you're a Marine. But he's my son too, and he needed help. And I didn't." I asked, my voice low but steady. "I served for 13 years. I sent money home. I kept this family afloat more times than either of you will admit. When did I become the one who didn't matter?" He hesitated, and in that split second of silence, I saw the truth. He hadn't meant to hurt me. He didn't do it out of malice. He did it out of weakness. Out of love, twisted into obligation. Out of fear of losing the son he never stopped trying to save. But intent didn't undo damage. And love, real love, never justified betrayal. Behind my father, the screen door creaked again, and Chad stepped out, rubbing sleep from his eyes like he was waking from a nap instead of waking to the consequences of his own actions. "Is this still about the house?" he mumbled. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a man who'd never been told no, never been held accountable, never been forced to stand on his own 2 feet. A man who'd grown comfortable taking from everyone around him because taking was easier than earning. "Yes," I said. "It's still about the house." Chad sighed dramatically. "Jesus, sis, relax. It's not like you're dead. You can rebuild. It's not the end of the world." "No," I said. "It's not the end of mine." I took a step closer. "But it might be the end of yours." His face twisted. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's a prediction." A car slowed down on the street, then stopped in front of the house. The driver rolled down the window. "Everything all right?" I heard yelling. It was Mr. Halpern, the neighbor who'd lived 2 doors down since I bought the place. He was the kind of retired Navy guy who mowed his lawn in perfect diagonal stripes and flagged down the mailman to chat about base news. He recognized me immediately and stepped out of the car. "Staff Sergeant Lawson," he said. "Didn't know you were home." "Just got back," I replied. He glanced at my father and Chad, then at Emily, his brow furrowed. "Something going on here?" My father stiffened. "Private family matter." "Actually," I said, "it's not." Mr. Halpern waited patiently, like the old sailor he was. I explained in simple terms what had happened. The sale, the fraud, the misuse of power of attorney. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I simply stated facts. When I finished, he whistled softly. "That's not good." "No," I said. "It's not." "You called the sheriff yet?" he asked. My father spun toward him. "No one needs to call anyone. We'll settle this ourselves." Emily shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "We won't. I'll be calling my attorney today. And I'll be contacting the VA legal office." I added. "They need to be involved." My father's face collapsed. "Maria, please don't do this. We're family." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said softly. "That's why this hurts." He swallowed hard. "I made a mistake." "You made several," I replied. "And now we deal with them." For a moment, no one spoke. A bird chirped somewhere. A car drove by. The world kept turning, even while ours felt like it was falling apart. I turned to Emily. "You should go inside. You got a long day ahead." She nodded and slipped back into the house. Mr. Halpern returned to his car, and I stepped off the porch, heading toward the street. My father called after me, his voice cracking. "Where are you going now?" "To do what you should have done," I said without turning around. "Tell the truth." I spent the rest of the morning in the sheriff's building, a place I'd walked into once before when I first moved to the neighborhood to register my address after deployment. Back then, it was a simple process. A few signatures, a polite greeting, an older deputy who thanked me for my service and handed me a local ordinance pamphlet. This time, the energy was different. I wasn't Staff Sergeant Lawson checking in. I was a woman walking in with a folder full of evidence that her own family had violated federal regulations while she was overseas serving her country. The deputy at the front desk recognized me almost immediately. Retirement age, silver hair, glasses perched low on his nose. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Back in town already?" "Lawson came home to a problem," I said. He looked up fully, then, studying my expression, taking in the folder clutched to my chest. He nodded slowly. "Let me get Lieutenant Donahue." Within minutes, I was sitting across from Donahue in his office. He was younger than the deputy outside, but older than me, late 40s maybe, with that tired authority that comes from 2 decades of putting out other people's fires. I laid the folder on his desk. He opened it, scanned the first few pages, and let out a long, quiet sigh. "Your father signed these?" "Yes." "And the buyer connection?" "Adam. You know him." "Unfortunately," I said. Donahue kept flipping, his face tightening with every page. "VA back property, unauthorized POA use, rush sale, no attorney oversight, no court approval. This isn't small." He sat back in his chair. "This is a mess." "I know." He rubbed his chin, thinking. The sale can't be finalized legally, and your father and brother may have, well, they may have committed more than one offense here. I'm aware. He closed the folder gently, like it was something fragile. I'll need to send this to the county prosecutor, and we'll need statements from everyone involved. You, the buyer, your father, your brother, the middleman, what's his name, Adam? He shook his head. He's been on our radar before. Of course he had. Lawson, he said carefully. Are you sure you want to move forward with this? Once we start, there's no taking it back. It will be public. It will get messy. It will destroy your father's reputation, and possibly more. I took a slow breath. Lieutenant, he destroyed my trust. He used my deployment to take something I spent years building. If I let that go because it's uncomfortable, then every service member with family issues becomes vulnerable. Donahue nodded. All right then, we'll start today. For the next hour, I sat with a young female deputy who transcribed my full account while Donahue made calls. I described everything. The power of attorney signing, the emails in Okinawa, the unreturned calls, the text from Chad, the balcony night when I discovered the ownership change, the rush sale, the porch confrontation, Emily's involvement. The deputy typed rapidly, but never interrupted, except to clarify dates and names. When I finished, she looked up and said quietly, I'm sorry. The unexpected sympathy almost cracked me. I nodded instead and said, thank you. When I stepped out of the sheriff's building, the afternoon sun was high, warming the pavement. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore, not in the childish sense. This was accountability, and accountability takes work. Emily called me later that afternoon. Her voice shook as she told me her attorney had confirmed everything. The sale was invalid, and she had grounds to pursue legal action, not just to reverse the transfer, but to hold both Adam and my father liable for damages. I didn't want any of this, she said. I just wanted a house. I know, I said gently. And you'll get one. But this one needs to be fixed first. She asked if I would be willing to speak with her attorney directly. I agreed. An hour later, I was on a conference call, walking through every detail again, letting the lawyer interrupt, ask questions, confirm timelines. The more I talked, the calmer I felt, like every word was lifting another weight off my chest. But the real confrontation was still ahead. Around 8 that evening, just as the sky was fading into that deep blue between daylight and night, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Emily. It wasn't the sheriff's office. It was Dad. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But something inside me, maybe the part that still remembered the father he used to be, made me answer. He didn't yell this time. His voice was small, tight, almost brittle. Maria, the sheriff's office came by. I know. They said you filed a report. I did. He let out a shaky breath. You didn't have to do that. I closed my eyes. I gave you every chance to be honest. You weren't. I made a mistake, he said again, like repeating the words would turn them into something meaningful. You made a series of choices, I corrected, and each one hurt someone. It wasn't supposed to hurt you, he whispered. Dad, I said, it was always going to hurt me. You sold my home. There was a long pause. I heard him inhale, heavy and slow. Can we talk in person? He asked. Yes, I said, but not alone. He sounded wounded by that, but he didn't argue. Okay, tomorrow morning. Your house. Asterisk my asterisk house. I repeated, letting the words settle into the space between us. I'll be there. When I hung up, the motel room felt heavier than before. Not because of fear. No, that part had passed. What I felt now was the weight of endings and beginnings, tangled together so tightly I couldn't tell which was which. I didn't sleep much that night, either, but I wasn't restless. I was ready. The next morning, I drove back to the house. Emily was there with her attorney. The sheriff's deputy arrived shortly after. Then my father and Chad pulled up in Dad's truck, both of them looking smaller than I'd ever seen them look. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Chad looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. We stood in a loose circle in the yard. No shouting, no dramatics, just the quiet tension of a truth finally cornered with nowhere left to go. Dad cleared his throat. I didn't realize it was illegal, he said. I swear to God, I didn't. You didn't want to realize, I said softly. There's a difference. Chad mumbled something, But his lawyer, yes, he had brought one, put a hand on his shoulder, silencing him. The sheriff's deputy explained the next steps, statements, temporary restrictions on both Dad and Chad regarding the property, a forthcoming investigation, the likelihood of charges. My father's face went pale at the word. He looked at me then, eyes watery. I never meant for it to come to this. I know, I said, but you brought us here. Then I turned away, because there was nothing else left to say. For the first time in days, I walked toward the front door and placed my hand on it. The paint felt cool beneath my fingertips, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. I didn't open it, not yet, but I stood there long enough to feel something returning, a sense of home. Not because the house was safe, but because the truth was. When everyone left that morning, the deputy, the attorneys, the neighbors who lingered near their windows pretending not to watch, I stayed in the yard long after the last car pulled away. The air was cool and still, carrying that quiet heaviness a neighborhood feels right after a storm. My father and brother had driven off without a word. Emily and her attorney had gone to file their paperwork, and I stood alone on the small patch of grass I used to mow every Sunday morning, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket I didn't know whether to wrap myself in or shake off. I finally opened the front door slowly, cautiously. It felt like walking into a memory that wasn't mine anymore. The living room looked different. Emily had rearranged the furniture, added soft blankets, hung pictures of her family on the walls. But underneath the new touches, I could still see the shadow of my own life. The dent on the floor where I dropped the toolbox 3 years ago. The little scratch on the doorframe from when I moved my dresser alone. The faint outline on the wall where my medals once hung. Homes change, but they remember. I walked through the place room by room, not to claim anything back at that moment, but to remind myself that I hadn't lost everything. The decision was now in the hands of the law, the attorneys, the county, and the VA. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I trusted that process more than I trusted anything my father could say or do. The last room I visited was my bedroom. Emily had put up white curtains that fluttered in the soft breeze from the cracked window. The bed was different, the color scheme different, the smell different, but the bones of the room were the same. And when I ran my hand along the windowsill, I felt the little ridge where I'd once carved my initials when I first bought the place. I'd forgotten it was there. The small, raised bumps of the letters hit me like a soft punch to the heart. I stood there for a long time before leaving. I didn't want to intrude more than necessary. They were still living there, after all, but I needed to feel the house one more time before stepping away again. While I walked out, I saw someone waiting for me at the bottom of the porch. My father. He was standing by his truck, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like a man carrying a weight he finally realized was his own. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was the longest silence we had shared in years. Finally, he said, "Can we talk?" I stepped down the porch, keeping a careful distance. "We've been talking." "No," he said quietly. "Not like this." Something in his voice, humility maybe, or the exhaustion of a man who'd run out of excuses, made me pause. I nodded once. He looked older than I remembered. Not old in the way time makes you old, but old in the way regret does, suddenly and all at once. His eyes were red, and his mouth trembled when he started speaking. "I thought I was helping him," he said. "I thought if I didn't step in, he'd lose everything." "You didn't step in," I said. "You stepped over me." He bowed his head. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to understand. I was scared." "Of what?" "Losing him," he whispered. "He's a mess, Maria. He always has been. But he's all I have left." He swallowed hard. "And I didn't want to lose you either. But I kept choosing wrong." I didn't soften. Not yet. But I listened. "Your mother was the strong one," he continued. "You got that from her. After she died, I didn't know how to hold things together. Chad needed me more, or at least it felt like he did. You were always fine. You were always the one who made it. I thought you wouldn't break." "I didn't," I said. "But you broke something in me." His eyes filled. "I know. And you broke something in yourself, too," I added. "You just don't see it yet." He covered his face with one hand, like he wanted to hide from the truth. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix all of it," I said gently. "But you can start by being honest and by letting the consequences happen." He let his hand fall. I don't want to go to jail. You may not, I said, but you may have to answer for what you did. He nodded slowly. If that's what it takes to make this right, then I'll do it. And for the first time since I returned, I believed him. He started to turn away, but then he stopped. I'm proud of you, he said softly. I know I never say it the right way, or at all, but I am. I didn't respond right away. The words were good, but they were late. Still, they were something. A start. And maybe that was enough for now. Take care of yourself, I said, and take responsibility. He nodded again, got in his truck, and drove off slowly, like his wheels were heavy. I stayed in the yard for a little longer, letting the air carry some of the weight off my shoulders. Emily came outside not long after, her hands in her coat pockets, her expression kinder than I deserved. Are you all right? She asked. I think so, I said. Are you? We will be, she answered. It'll take time, but we'll figure it out. I'm glad, I told her. No matter what happens, I want you to land on your feet. She smiled a little. You too. The next weeks unfolded slowly. Attorneys met. Papers were filed. Adam disappeared for 2 days until the sheriff found him hiding at a friend's trailer. Chad attended mandatory meetings with a public defender. My father gave a statement that lasted 3 hours and left him pale and shaking. But he didn't back out. He faced what he had done. And the house. After enough legal wrangling to fill a drawer, the sale was officially voided. Emily and her husband were reimbursed through the county's emergency fraud fund, while pursuing compensation from Adam. My house remained mine, though it would be months before everything settled enough for me to move back in. But that was all right. Healing takes time. The day I finally stepped inside as the official owner again, I walked through each room slowly, feeling every memory flood back through the walls. This time, though, there was something else. Peace. Not perfect peace. Not complete peace. But a quiet acceptance. A gentleness I hadn't felt in years. I stood in the middle of the living room and whispered, I'm home. But the truth was bigger than that. I wasn't just home. I was whole again. In a way betrayal couldn't break, and forgiveness didn't erase, but softened, like something sharp finally losing its edge. And if there's anything I wanted to take from my story, it's this. Family can fail you. People can disappoint you. The ones you love most can be the ones who hurt you deepest. But you do not lose your worth because someone else lost their way. You do not stop deserving a place in this world because someone tried to take it from you. And sometimes, just sometimes, the hardest journeys bring the clearest lessons. So, I've told you my story. What would you have done if your own family pulled something like this? I'm honestly curious to hear your thoughts down in the comments.